With spring practice just 4 weeks away, we are going to get our first look at Notre Dame's current offensive depth chart ahead of the 2025 season. Who will take the first reps under center, and which offensive linemen are poised to step into key roles? We're breaking it all down right here on Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome in to another edition of Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018. Now I'm a producer at Fox Sports, and it is great to have you here with me on Thursday, February 20th. And thanks for making this your first listen of the day. A couple quick programming notes, though, before we get started here. First, remember to hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. And second, if you've got a question and you want answered on the show, send them in now because we are doing another mailbag episode tomorrow morning. You can drop yours below in the YouTube comments or tweet the show at Locked On Irish, or you can also DM me on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. But as for today, we're breaking down Notre Dame's projected offensive depth chart for spring practice. Basically, this is a projection for what the depth chart is going to look like at the start of spring, and then we will revisit this once it's all said and done, and Notre Dame has concluded the blue and gold game, and we're heading into the summer, and then I'm also going to do the same exercise on the defensive side of the ball next week. It is important to point out that some of the transfers that we talk about here are not going to be able to participate in spring ball because they are still finishing up their credits at the school that they are transferring from, but we will mention them when the time comes. We're also going to take a look at the offensive line, predict which 5 players will take the first team reps, plus we'll dive into the pass catchers and break down the depth at wide receiver and tight end. But first, we have to start where every offense begins, with the quarterback battle and the running back rotation. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the quarterback. So as a reminder, if you've been listening to the show every day throughout this offseason, you know that I dedicated an entire episode to each one of the quarterbacks who has a legitimate shot at winning the starting job. Steve Angeli, Kenny Minchey, and CJ Carr. I did that 3-part series over the course of the past 2 weeks, and guess what? We're going to talk about it a little bit more today because the dynamic in the spring is going to be very interesting. So right now, going into spring, I think it's going to be Steve Angeli getting the first team reps, Kenny Minchey right there behind him, CJ Carr in at 3, and then Blake Hebert, the freshman who's an early enrollee. He's going to be there, but he is almost certainly going to redshirt this season unless something goes horribly wrong. But how are they going to disperse the first team reps? That is what I'm most interested in because Steve Angeli is going to get the first crack at it. He's been around the longest. He got the first team reps during last spring practice when Riley Leonard missed basically the whole thing while he was dealing with that ankle injury. Kenny Minchey got some reps with the ones as well, but now CJ Carr is going to get his shot to get some reps with the ones because he didn't really get that opportunity last spring. There were just too many guys ahead of him, but when he got in against the 2s and the 3s, he shined. When he got in going up against his other freshman correspondents, he shined there as well. Now he's going to get a chance to do it against the first team defense in spring practice, and I think everybody is thrilled to see that. But it's going to be Steve Angeli's turn first, Kenny Minchey, and CJ Carr. On one hand, it is great to have 3 very talented quarterbacks competing for the job, but on the other, it is going to be a real challenge for the coaching staff to get these guys reps with the first team, like meaningful reps, because there's not that many practices in the spring, and the intensity of these is definitely going to be a little bit toned down, considering the fact that Notre Dame's season just ended what feels like a few days ago when they lost the national championship. But they are coming off the longest season in the history of Notre Dame football. So they are still going to be intense at certain points, but as a whole, it's not going to be like 100% all the time. But they still need to see what they have with Carr, Minchey, and Angeli working with the ones. I think Minchey and Carr need to maximize every opportunity they get out there, and specifically Minchey, because look, the way that some people are talking about this competition, some people have already written them off, and I don't think that's fair. I think there is certainly a talented quarterback in there in Kenny Minchey, but the pressure is on him to make the most out of every opportunity, and I think he's going to get the first chance over CJ Carr. But by the end of the spring practice, I do think it's going to be a 2-quarterback race. And as I said, in the quarterback 3-part series, I do expect it to be Steve Angeli and CJ Carr coming out of the spring. And unfortunately, Kenny Minchey is going to come in third. Someone's got to come in third, right? And I think whoever comes in third is likely going to transfer after the spring. I think it'll be Kenny Minchey, but we'll see what happens. At running back, we kind of have a good sense of what the depth chart is going to look like, at least going into spring. We know it's going to be Jeremiah Love at 1, Jadarian Price 2, Aeneas Williams 3, Keidron Young 4, and then Nolan James Jr., the early enrollee freshman, at the 5 spot. But who steps up behind Love and Price? Because honestly, Jeremiah Love should be put in bubble wrap for spring practice. He does not need to do anything. He has already proven that he's the best returning running back in all of college football, and he was not healthy for the last couple months of the season for Notre Dame. So I don't expect him to get all that much work out there. He's going to, get some reps to stay loose and everything, but I highly doubt we're going to see a whole lot of Jeremiah Love, and honestly, Jadarian Price too, for that matter, because you kind of know what you have in him. He's been around for a long time. We know he's extremely talented. He certainly has areas of his game that he needs to improve, but still, you don't really want to run him into the ground in spring practice because he was a big part of this postseason run. So it's really just going to be Aeneas Williams, Keidron Young, and even Nolan James Jr. getting a ton of reps. And I think because of what Aeneas Williams showed last year as a true freshman, which was really impressive, he had 34 carries, 219 rushing yards, which is 6.4 yards per carry and 2 touchdowns. But he also was really good as a pass catcher. 18 receptions, 172 receiving yards, and 9.6 yards per reception, including one of the biggest plays of the year when he caught that wheel route against Penn State to set up Notre Dame for a touchdown on that first drive out of the second half. Like, everyone kind of assumes Aeneas Williams is going to be the number 3 back next year, and for good reason, but do not sleep on Keidron Young. Remember, Keidron Young was a big-time prospect coming out of high school. He dominated the high school scene in Texas, which is no small feat, and he physically looks the part of a great college running back. He was not healthy last spring, and he redshirted this past season, so we didn't really see a ton, but he did get 21 carries, finished with 116 yards and a touchdown in garbage time of last season, and he has a great opportunity this spring to just ball out because Notre Dame has a new running backs coach in Jaywan Sider. Like, obviously, he's going to have access to the film and see what Aeneas Williams did last year, but for the most part, Young and Williams are kind of starting with the clean slate with this new running backs coach, and I think this is a great opportunity for Young to try and take that third spot away from Williams. Is it going to be easy? No, because I think Williams is a really good player, but I think Keidron Young is extremely talented as well, and now that he's healthy and he's been in the system for a full year, I think he's got a great chance. Like, it would not surprise me if when spring practice is all said and done, we're talking a lot about Keidron Young and just the embarrassment of riches that Notre Dame has in this running back room with a new coach. And at 5 with Nolan James Jr., I think he's going to get some use as well. But I think for him, the focus is going to be on bulking up in the weight room because I think he has a long way to go physically before he makes any legitimate impact on the college game. But this is a very, very loaded room, and it's going to be interesting to see how much Coach Jaywan Sider likes to rotate these guys, because at Penn State, specifically this past season, and even the year prior as well, it was really just a 2-man rotation with Nicholas Singleton and Kaytron Allen. Actually, Kaytron Allen got the bulk of the reps, so I probably should have mentioned him first. But they did run a lot with their backup quarterback, the one who transferred right before the start of the college football playoffs to be the starting quarterback at Missouri. Bo Pribula, I believe his last name was. He ran it a lot, so they did kind of have 3 different guys to get the ball to. We're not going to have Notre Dame running a ton of design runs with the quarterback this year, unlike last year when they had Riley Leonard. So I think they're going to rotate 3 running backs consistently, but they've got 4 really good ones in the room. And it's going to be interesting to see how Coach Sider likes to rotate these guys now that he gets to see him or really work with all these guys for the very first time. While the quarterback competition is going to get the most attention, Notre Dame's passing game is still searching for reliable playmakers. Who steps up at wide receiver, and how does the tight end room look post-Mitchell Evans? That's next on Locked On Irish. Today's episode is brought to you by Roy. Attention Irish fans, the future of college sports is here and it's transparent. Before the Roy app, NIL negotiations often happened under the table and fans didn't have a clear way to directly support the athletes they love. Now with Roy, you get to be part of the change and support Notre Dame athletes in the most transparent way possible. Roy, the NIL app, allows you to choose the player you want to support, decide how much you want to contribute, and receive exclusive content from the athletes you support. And the best part, if your player transfers, you get your money back. It's a risk-free way to show your support. The Roy app is giving fans control. No more uncertainty. Now you can provide transparent, impactful support and help shape the team and the future of college sports with your contributions. Download the Roy app now from the App Store and start backing Notre Dame athletes the way they deserve with transparency, trust, and a real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite players. All right, now let's take a look at the wide receivers. This is going to be a very interesting race during spring because Malachi Fields, the transfer they brought in from Virginia, who projects to be wide receiver 1, and certainly the starting boundary receiver, is not going to be able to participate because he is dealing with an injury. I believe that he had to have surgery. I can't confirm that, but I don't think he's going to be very active in spring at all. They also have Jordan Faison, who is the returning starting Z receiver. He is not going to be participating much at all because he plays lacrosse for Notre Dame. Not only does he play lacrosse, he's very good. So he's not going to be able to do a whole lot for the football team. Everyone else should be able to participate, and Notre Dame has to replace a lot of guys who produced last season. Bo Collins, Chris Mitchell, Jane Harrison are all gone to the NFL. Jane Thomas and Deion Colsey transferred out. So there's a lot of talent in this room, but there's a lot of unproven talent. So here's how I think it's going to look. So at X, it's going to be Malachi Fields once he's back healthy. But then behind him, who's going to get the first crack at it? I think it's going to be Micah Gilbert, who is going to be entering his second season with the program, but is a redshirt freshman. At Z, we know that Jordan Faison is going to start, but who's behind him? I think it's going to be KK Smith and Cam Williams. At slot, it's going to be Jaden Greathouse, Will Pauling, and Logan Saldate. And then you've got 3 freshmen, Elijah Burris, Scrap Richardson, and Jerome Bettis Jr. So how is the rotation going to shape up during spring? Well, we know that wide receivers coach Mike Brown wants to rotate 6 guys. Malachi Fields, Jordan Faison, Jaden Greathouse, and Will Pauling are the known commodities. Now, granted, Malachi Fields and Will Pauling did it at different schools, but those guys produced at a high level. You look at what Malachi Fields did at Virginia, very consistent. You know you're going to get 800-plus receiving yards, 5 touchdowns, around 55 receptions. That's what he's done the past 2 years. Will Pauling, a couple years ago, had an awesome season, like 70 catches, almost 1,000 receiving yards. He was terrific. Now, he took a dip this past season, but part of that can be attributed to the fact that Wisconsin did not have a competent quarterback. So either way, he still produced at a high level. Mike Brown really likes him. He coached him at Cincinnati and Wisconsin, and that's a big reason why Will Pauling is now with Notre Dame. So they have 4 guys who you know are going to be a big part of the rotation. So who gets those other 2 spots? And then who are the depth pieces because injuries are going to happen, especially at wide receiver. It's going to be a competition between Micah Gilbert, KK Smith, Cam Williams, Logan Saldate, and then if any one of these freshmen end up stepping up and surprising us all, they might have a chance, but I don't really see that happening. So it's going to be Gilbert, Smith, Williams, and Saldate competing for 2 spots to be in that rotation. That's going to be a very fun battle. I have the most confidence in Micah Gilbert to step up among the younger guys. I think KK Smith has sort of waited his turn, but he's dealt with a lot of injuries. He dealt with another shoulder injury recently, and as we know, those typically have a chance of coming back. So KK Smith, this is kind of a make or break spring practice for him because he's been around the program longer than guys like Micah Gilbert and Cam Williams and Logan Saldate. Plus, Jordan Faison isn't going to be around. So this is his chance to get on the field with the ones, work with whoever ends up being the starting quarterback and make some strides and get on the field a little bit more. There were some plays last year when he'd come in garbage time, we were like, wow, that was really good. And then he also had some bad drops as well. So how he performs in this spring is going to be critical to his future at Notre Dame. Micah Gilbert was one of the stars of the spring game last year, had 2 touchdowns, just looked mature beyond his years. He looked like he was more physically developed than all the other guys. So I feel really good that he is going to be in the rotation. But is this going to be a situation where Micah Gilbert is just a rotation piece, like the 5th or 6th guy, or can he really assert himself as one of the top 4 guys? He's going to have to beat out a proven guy to do it, but I think he has the talent and the ability to do so. He's going to be one of the guys that I am focused on the most during spring. Cam Williams, Logan Saldate, 2 other guys who are going to be entering the redshirt freshman season. Cam Williams is the big-time prospect. Logan Saldate was someone who kind of flew under the radar, but I've honestly heard more about Logan Saldate and what he did on scout team last year than Cam Williams. It doesn't mean that Cam Williams isn't going to work out, but if Williams does not take a big step forward this spring, then I have my doubts about whether he can ever become like that superstar level receiver at Notre Dame. That doesn't mean he can't be really good at Notre Dame, but if you're going to be a superstar wide receiver, you're probably showing a lot of signs by that during your second season with the team. So if this is a pretty quiet spring for Cam Williams. I'm going to have my doubts about his ceiling, but I still think he can be a good player. So Notre Dame has a bunch of guys, but they have less proven depth than what they had last season. But I am very excited about the talent in this room, and I think that they have a higher ceiling. Will they finally be a strength this year? It's too early to say, but I'm very excited to see how it shakes out at wide receiver. At tight end, it's not great, okay? So they lose Mitchell Evans, and they have Eli Raridon coming back, which is good. Eli Raridon is a good player. But I don't think they're going to have Cooper Flanagan for any part of this season. So he went out in like the first quarter of the Sugar Bowl against Georgia, and then after the game, Mark Streetman announced that Cooper Flanagan was going to be out for the rest of the 2024 season. He was going to miss the remainder of the college football playoffs, which he did. It is my understanding that Cooper Flanagan has a ruptured Achilles and is going to miss this entire upcoming season as well. And now, all of a sudden, Notre Dame is very thin at tight end because other than Eli Raridon, all they have is Ty Washington, the transfer from Arkansas, and they have Jack Larson, who's going to be entering his second year with the program, redshirt freshman, and then James Flanagan, who is going to be a true freshman, but he's not even going to be on the team in spring. He's going to join the team in the summer. So they really only have 3 tight ends in the spring with Raridon, Washington, and Larson. And that is not a really good place to be, and it's certainly not a familiar place to be for Notre Dame. It looks like Kevin Bauman is not going to be with the program. Maybe he changed his mind, but he's been around for a long time, dealt with so many injuries. I understand if he just wants to step away from football. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on Eli Raridon to have a breakout season. Notre Dame really needs him to step up and be a big-time player. He had a pretty modest season in 2024. Only had 11 catches for 90 yards, but he did have 2 touchdowns, and they threw to him on a critical drive against Penn State in the end zone, and he drew a pass interference penalty. So he was a part of the mix, but he hasn't really made the impact that I thought he would make by this point in his career. Now, it's not his fault that he had 2 very serious knee injuries, but this past season, he was able to remain healthy for the entire year. Next season is a gigantic year for him in his development. He really needs to take that step forward because whoever ends up being the starting quarterback, whether it be Steve Angeli, Carr, or maybe even Minchey, they're going to need a safety net at tight end. And Notre Dame doesn't have a proven one yet. So one of these guys needs to step up. I'm very high on what James Flanagan can do as a true freshman. He is one of those guys that I'm looking at like, hey, not only do I think you can have a great freshman season, Notre Dame might need him to. It might be a Leonard Moore situation from last year where he kind of took everyone by surprise, but after Morrison got hurt, they really needed him to step up, and that's exactly what he did. Am I expecting James Flanagan to be a freshman All-American? Not necessarily, but they're going to need something from him once he joins the team. So I'm not sure if this group, as it is currently constructed, assuming that Cooper Flanagan is out the rest of the year, is good enough to help this offense reach their full potential, which is why I think that Notre Dame is going to pursue a tight end in the transfer portal in this spring cycle, because when the Cooper Flanagan injury happened, it was January 2nd. So by that point, the transfer portal had already closed for all the teams who weren't in the college football playoff. So I don't think Notre Dame anticipated that they would need a tight end. But after the Cooper Flanagan injury, I think they're going to be pretty aggressive in the portal and try to get another depth piece in the room. Maybe they're able to get a starter, but they need someone because the guys that they have in there right now, Eli Raridon, Ty Washington, Jack Larson, and then eventually James Flanagan, they are one injury away at that position from being in a really dire state. Will Eli Raridon step up? We'll see. Will Ty Washington be a surprise from Arkansas? They need him to be, because that room is pretty thin right now, and it's going to be one of the more interesting things to follow because Notre Dame is never in this position, right? Like, they are tight end you. They should not be thin at tight end, but unfortunately, that is the reality at this point in time. Of course, none of this really matters if the offensive line doesn't hold up this season. Who's going to anchor the unit in 2025, and which young lineman could push for playing time? Stick around. So I've said it before on the show, even though the quarterback competition is going to garner all the attention of the offseason, I am so intrigued by what's going on the offensive line because they are going to have to pick a starting 5 at some point, and there are so many talented guys in that room, far more than 5, even after Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler left via the transfer portal. So I can't wait to see how this all unfolds on the line of scrimmage. So here's how I think it's going to start in spring. Who knows what it's going to be when Notre Dame takes the field in Miami? Because one thing we have learned so long as Joe Rudolph has been the offensive line coach is you can expect some surprises. Like no one expected Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler to win the starting guard jobs a couple years ago. And no one expected Sam Pendleton and Anthony Knapp to be on the left side of the offensive line going into Texas A&M. That's exactly what happened. But going into spring, this is how I think the first team offensive line is going to look. Charles Jagusah at left tackle, Billy Strouth at left guard, Ashton Craig at center, although he is recovering from a serious knee injury that he suffered against Purdue last season. There have been some rumblings that he is going to be somewhat of a participant in the spring and will be more involved in the offseason. So we can all expect that he's going to be the starting center. I just don't know how involved he's going to be in the spring, but we can pencil him in with the first team for now. At right guard, here's a bold prediction. I think it's going to be Anthony Knapp, who started 15 games at left tackle this past season. And then at right tackle, Emil Wagner, who started every game there this past year. So let's look at the tackles. I've got Charles Jagusah in there, and I think Gerby Lambert is going to be the first guy off the bench at either spot, a left tackle or a right tackle. I know a lot of people are really high on Will Black, the true freshman. He's a 5-star. He's not even going to be on the team in spring. So it's really just going to be three guys, Jagusah, Lambert, and Wagner getting the bulk of the reps. But I do think that Anthony Knapp probably deserves at least some opportunity to win the left tackle spot. But the difference here is last year, Charles Jagusah was going to be the left tackle over Anthony Knapp, but then he suffered that torn pectoral injury the first week of camp. So then Anthony Knapp came in. It wasn't a situation where Knapp beat him out. And then once Knapp got hurt, right before the national championship game, Charles Jagusah had enough time to recover from that injury and then moved into the left tackle spot. I understand that a lot of people are really high in Gerby Lambert. I am one of those people. But the fact that Notre Dame went with Charles Jagusah at left tackle in the national championship game, and it didn't seem like they even entertained the idea of giving Gerby Lambert a chance to start there, tells me that there's probably a significant gap, at least at this point in time, between Jagusah and Lambert, because not only did he miss the entire season, he wasn't practicing. He was out of game shape, and then he came in that Penn State game at guard. So the fact that they keep putting him out there shows me that this coaching staff thinks that Charles Jagusah is going to be like an elite offensive lineman, and he could probably move around anywhere on this line, and he would succeed. But I think they really like him at left tackle. I know that we've talked about potentially moving him to guard. I think he's got that spot down. So if he's got the left tackle spot, and Emil Wagner, who played pretty well last season. I mean, he had the best run blocking grade on Pro Football Focus of any Notre Dame offensive lineman last year, and he was third in pass blocking among starters. So those two spots feel like they're set. Now, maybe Gerby Lambert takes this huge step in his second year in the program. He forces himself on the field, and then now you've got all kinds of questions, right? Like, where do you move Charles Jagusah? See, like, this is why the position is so interesting. But right now, as we stand here today, I think it's going to be Jagusah at left, Wagner at right, Lambert, first guy off the bench at either one, and then maybe Will Black surprises everyone in the spring, or in the summer, once he joins the program and he's ready to go. Maybe he fights for playing time, but I don't really see that happening. At left guard, that's settled. That's going to be Billy Strouth, and Sullivan Absher is going to be the first guy on the off the bench. That's how I think it is going to be right now. We talked about center already. Ashton Craig is probably going to be the first team center, assuming that he's healthy, but Joe Otting is going to get the first crack at the backup spot. Now, at the end of last season, the backup center was Sam Pendleton, who is now with the Tennessee Volunteers. So Joe Otting is going to have a shot to be the backup. And then at right guard, I mean, I'm already penciling in Anthony Knapp, who was left tackle last year at this spot. So this could honestly go either way. I would not be surprised if maybe Sullivan Absher won a guard spot, because that is a guy who the coaching staff has sort of raved about behind closed doors, but he never really made a dent in the rotation last year, despite the fact that Notre Dame had to mix and match all over the place and different young guys were getting spots. Like Sullivan Absher had opportunities last year to finally get into that starting five, and it just didn't happen, which is why I think Anthony Knapp is going to beat him out and take over that right guard spot. But the coaching staff still really likes Sullivan Absher, and I think that he's going to be the first guy off the bench at either guard spot. So you've got all kinds of different projections here, right? You have all kinds of different players. Like Gerby Lambert on the bench, that seems like, something that's hard to believe, because he looks like a future NFL first rounder at tackle, right? And if you look at some of the other great Notre Dame offensive linemen that have come through the program in recent years, they started as redshirt freshmen. Mike McGlinchey, Quentin Nelson, Zach Martin, like they started to make their dent in their second year with the program. If Gerby Lambert is as good as we think he could be, there's a chance that he wins one of these jobs, and then now all of a sudden you can move Charles Jagasaw to right guard, and then, you have like an embarrassment of riches because now you have Anthony Knapp, who started 15 games at left tackle on a team that went to the national championship as your first guy off the bench. And it's just a really interesting spot. And one thing that we can count on, like I was saying earlier, is that Joe Rudolph is going to surprise you. He absolutely is. But how are they going to disperse these first team reps? Because like I was saying, Anthony Knapp deserves a shot to play left tackle. Like, he did it well last year. I know it wasn't always perfect, especially at the beginning of the year, but Jeremiah Love's 98-yard touchdown against Indiana does not happen if Knapp doesn't dominate Kamara, one of the best players in the Big Ten last year, the edge rusher on IU. Like, he just moved him backwards, created a huge lane for Jeremiah Love. He hit it, gone, one of the biggest plays of the season. Now, that being said, I don't think he's going to beat out Charles Jagasaw, but he's probably going to earn his way onto the field. Like, true freshmen don't start on a Notre Dame offensive line if they don't have the goods, and Anthony Knapp certainly has the goods. And this guy is very versatile. He was like the third-string center coming out of spring last year and ended up starting at left tackle. So he is a guy who they can move around a lot. They could also move Charles Jagasaw around a lot. I don't think Emil Wagner's moving. If Billy Strouth moves, he's just moving to right guard, but I think they really like him at that left guard spot. So this is just going to be a very interesting thing to follow throughout the spring and then throughout fall camp as well, because I think this group has a chance to be elite. Elite. I think Billy Strouth could be a great guard in college football. Charles Jagasaw, his ceiling appears to be through the roof. I already talked about Kirby Lambert. Ashton Craig, if he can stay healthy, I think he can be one of the best centers in all of college football. If Anthony Knapp ends up winning the right guard spot and he continues on his ascent, that could be outstanding. And Emil Wagner was very underrated last season, and if he takes another step forward in his second season as a starter, I'm telling you, man, this could be one of, if not the best offensive lines in the country, but there are going to be a lot of reps to disperse amongst a bunch of talented guys, and even though I'm predicting what I think it will be now with Jagasaw, Strouth, Craig, Knapp, and Wagner, who knows what it's going to look like when Notre Dame takes the field against Miami. But that is going to do it for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. This is your last call for mailbag questions. Remember, we're doing a mailbag on the show tomorrow morning, so make sure you tune into that. And the best way to never miss an episode is to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. And if you are watching along on YouTube, please like this video below. You can also hit the bell button so that way you get a notification every time we release a new episode. Typically, it's 7 a.m. Eastern. And you can also rate the podcast 5 stars and leave a review on your preferred platform. That stuff really goes a long way, and I really appreciate the support, and I'll see you on Friday.